The battle above the red moon of Kareth had already ended. Broken ships floated silently in space while fire burned inside the remains of the alien fleet. Lieutenant Aria Vex sat alone inside her damaged escape pod. Warning lights flashed around her, and the cold metal walls shook with every passing second. She knew rescue would never come. Her people had lost the battle. Aria belonged to the Zeloran Empire. Since childhood, she had heard stories about humans. They were called savage fighters, dangerous warriors, and monsters who showed no mercy to their enemies. Every Zeloran child grew up fearing humanity. Their teachers said one thing again and again: never allow yourself to be captured by humans. The escape pod alarm suddenly became louder. A large shadow moved across her small window. Aria looked outside and felt her heart stop. A human ship had found her. The dark gray vessel slowly moved closer until it blocked the stars behind it. Her hands began to shake. For her, the war was over. The pod door opened with a loud hiss. Bright lights entered the small room. 3 human soldiers stood outside in heavy armor. Their weapons were ready, but none of them fired. Aria slowly raised her hands. She expected shouting, anger, or violence. Instead, one soldier simply spoke through a translator. "Do not move. You are injured. We will help you." Aria could hardly believe the words she had heard. Help? Humans were not supposed to help enemy soldiers. She carefully stepped forward and waited for the chains to come. Instead, one soldier offered his hand to support her as she walked out of the pod. Another covered her with a warm emergency blanket. The human ship felt strangely quiet. No one screamed at her. No one pushed her to the floor. The soldiers moved quickly but calmly as they carried wounded people through the hallways. Aria looked around and noticed something that confused her even more. Some of the injured soldiers were not human at all. There were members of her own species lying on medical beds beside human soldiers. Human doctors treated everyone without asking who belonged to which side. One doctor worked desperately to save a Zeloran pilot whose ship had attacked them only hours earlier. Aria stared at the scene in complete silence. A female doctor finally stopped in front of her. The doctor looked at the blood on Aria's arm and immediately called for medical tools. Aria stepped backward in fear. She expected pain or experiments. Instead, the doctor carefully cleaned the wound and placed a bandage around it. "This may hurt for a second," the doctor said softly. Aria waited for cruelty that never came. The medicine entered her arm and the pain slowly disappeared. The doctor smiled before moving to the next patient. Aria watched her leave and felt more afraid than before. Nothing made sense anymore. Hours later, Aria sat alone inside a small room. The door was not locked. There were no chains on her hands and no guards standing outside. On a nearby table sat a warm meal and a bottle of water. She looked at the food as if it were some kind of trap. The door suddenly opened. A tall human officer entered the room. His uniform showed signs of battle damage, and one arm was wrapped in bandages. He placed another food pack on the table and sat across from her. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, the officer looked directly at her. "You are safe here," he said calmly. "The war outside can wait until people stop bleeding." Aria stared at him in disbelief. "You know I am your enemy," she replied quietly. The officer nodded once. "Today you are a wounded soldier," he answered. "That matters more." For the first time in her life, Lieutenant Aria Vex did not know what to believe. Everything she had learned about humanity was breaking apart in front of her eyes, but she did not know that the biggest surprise was still waiting for her. Far away in deep space, another fleet was already moving toward the human ship, and this time, it was not coming to rescue her. The next morning, Aria woke up to the sound of alarms echoing through the ship. Red lights flashed across the walls as crew members hurried through the corridors. She quickly stood up and moved toward the open door of her room. Nobody stopped her. Nobody pointed a weapon at her. The strange trust of the humans continued to confuse her. As she walked through the hallway, she saw human soldiers preparing for battle. Some carried weapons while others loaded supplies into transport vehicles. Their faces showed concern but not fear. Aria noticed something even stranger. Human soldiers were helping wounded Zeloran prisoners reach safe rooms before helping themselves. Near the medical bay, Aria saw the human officer again. Captain Daniel Ross was speaking with his crew while looking at a large star map. The approaching fleet was marked in red. Aria recognized the symbols immediately. It was a Zeloran battle fleet. Her own people had arrived. For a brief moment, hope returned to her heart. Maybe they had come to rescue her after all. But as she listened carefully, she heard words that made her blood run cold. The fleet commander had ordered the destruction of the entire area. No survivors were to remain behind. Aria could not believe what she heard. The human colony below the ship held thousands of civilians. Families, workers, and children lived there. Yet her own commanders planned to destroy everything just to remove witnesses of their defeat. Suddenly, the humans she feared looked less dangerous than the leaders she trusted. Captain Ross noticed her standing nearby. Instead of hiding information, he walked toward her and pointed at the battle screen. "Your fleet will arrive in 3 hours," he said calmly. "We are preparing evacuation ships for civilians first." Aria stared at him in shock. "You still have time to escape," she said quietly. "Why stay here?" The captain looked through the window toward the distant planet below. "Because someone has to protect the people who cannot protect themselves." Before Aria could answer, another alarm sounded across the ship. A voice came through the speakers. "Enemy fleet entering sensor range." The room suddenly became silent. Aria looked at the screen and felt fear growing inside her chest. At the front of the enemy fleet was the flagship of Admiral Zerath, and Aria knew one terrible truth about him. He never accepted surrender. The massive Zeloran fleet appeared on the main screen like a dark storm in space. More than 50 warships moved toward the human colony below. Captain Ross immediately gave orders to begin civilian evacuation. Transport ships started leaving the planet one after another. Human pilots stayed behind to protect those who could not escape in time. Aria stood near the command center window and watched the scene in silence. She expected the humans to save themselves first and abandon everyone else. Instead, the soldiers guided families, workers, and even enemy prisoners toward the evacuation ships. No one was left behind. The humans treated every life as important. Suddenly, the first enemy attack began. Bright beams of energy crossed the darkness and struck the human defense ships. The entire vessel shook violently as alarms echoed through every corridor. Crew members rushed to their stations while Captain Ross remained calm. He continued giving orders as if fear did not exist. A report quickly arrived from the surface colony. One evacuation shuttle carrying children had crashed near the mountains after enemy fire damaged its engines. The rescue team could not reach them in time because enemy fighters controlled the area. The room became silent as everyone looked toward the captain. Without hesitation, Captain Ross stood up from his chair. He ordered another officer to take command of the ship, while he prepared a rescue mission himself. Aria could hardly believe what she was hearing. The captain of the entire defense force was leaving the safety of his ship to save strangers. "You could die down there," Aria said as she followed him toward the hangar. Captain Ross picked up his helmet and looked at her calmly. "Those children will die if nobody goes." For several seconds, Aria said nothing. Then she made a decision that surprised even herself. "I am coming with you." The captain looked at her with surprise but nodded once. Minutes later, their small transport ship disappeared into the fire and chaos below, and waiting for them on the planet's surface were enemy soldiers from Aria's own empire. Captain Ross and Aria landed near the crashed shuttle as explosions lit up the night sky. Smoke covered the mountains, and pieces of metal were scattered across the ground. Inside the damaged shuttle, frightened children waited for help. Some were crying while others sat quietly in fear. The rescue team had arrived just in time. Human soldiers quickly moved to protect the area while Captain Ross entered the shuttle. He carried the youngest child in his arms and guided the others outside one by one. Aria watched him carefully. This was the same man who commanded warships in battle, yet now he risked his life for children he had never met. Suddenly, enemy soldiers appeared on the nearby hills. Their weapons opened fire without warning. The human soldiers returned fire and moved the children toward safety. Aria looked through the smoke and recognized the uniforms immediately. They belonged to Admiral Zerath's forces. Her own people were trying to kill everyone below. One of the enemy officers saw Aria and shouted her name across the battlefield. He ordered her to return immediately and abandon the humans. He promised that the Empire would forgive her if she obeyed. For a moment, Aria stood frozen between two worlds. One side was her past and the other was standing beside her. Captain Ross never asked her to choose. He simply continued helping the children reach the transport ship. Seeing this changed something inside her. The humans had treated her with kindness, even when she was their enemy. Now her own people showed no mercy to innocent lives. Aria picked up her weapon and turned toward the enemy soldiers. For the first time in her life, she stood beside humans in battle. Together they protected the children and pushed the attackers back into the darkness. The last transport ship finally lifted into the sky and escaped safely. As the rescue team prepared to leave, a loud explosion shook the valley. Part of the mountain collapsed behind them, cutting off their only path back to the landing zone. Smoke and dust filled the air as the radio signal disappeared. Captain Ross looked around and understood the danger immediately. They were trapped, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the smoke, Admiral Zerath himself was waiting for them. Captain Ross and his team moved carefully through the destroyed valley. Their communication systems were damaged, and the rescue ship could not find their location. Around them, enemy patrols searched the area with drones and scanners. Every minute made escape harder. Aria knew Admiral Zerath would never allow survivors to leave the planet alive. As the group reached an abandoned mining station, enemy soldiers surrounded the building from every side. Their commander stepped forward and demanded Aria's surrender. He promised safety if she handed over the humans. The soldiers inside looked toward Captain Ross, waiting for his decision. Instead of answering with anger, the captain stepped in front of Aria. "She is under our protection now," Captain Ross said calmly. The enemy commander laughed and ordered his soldiers to prepare for attack. Aria could not understand what she was seeing. Humans were risking their lives to protect someone who had once fought against them. No one asked where she came from or whose side she belonged to. For the first time, she truly understood humanity. The battle began moments later. Human soldiers defended the station while Aria fought beside them. Together they held their position against a much larger force. Just as their ammunition began to run low, powerful engines echoed through the sky above them. Human rescue ships had finally arrived. The enemy forces quickly retreated as human fighters entered the battle. Within minutes, Admiral Zerath ordered a full withdrawal from the planet. The civilians were safe, the children had escaped, and the rescue team had survived. Captain Ross looked toward the sky and allowed himself a small smile. The mission was finally over. Several weeks later, Aria stood before the leaders of the Zeloran Empire. The government expected stories of human cruelty and violence. Instead, Aria told them about kindness, courage, and mercy. She spoke about soldiers who protected enemies and captains who risked everything for strangers. "The galaxy fears humans for the wrong reason," Aria said quietly. "They are not feared because they are monsters. They are feared because even in war they refuse to stop being human." And for Aria Vex, the day she was captured by humans became the day she stopped fearing them forever.